Imagine waking up one morning and your job title is literally the man who makes people scream. You're not a rock star. You're not a football coach. You are a medieval torturer. And today, just like every other day, you have appointments. You drag yourself out of bed in your stone chamber. It's cold. It's always cold. There's no central heating in the 14th century, no warm shower to ease you into the morning, no coffee, and definitely no HR department to complain to when things get weird at work. You pull on your rough linen shirt, your heavy leather apron, and, this is important, your very specific pair of gloves. Because even in the Middle Ages, a professional had standards. Now, before we go any further, let's clear something up. When most people imagine a medieval torturer, they picture some enormous, masked brute with zero personality who just laughs maniacally and pulls levers all day. The reality was far more bureaucratic, far more strange, and, in a deeply uncomfortable way, far more human. These were not random monsters. They were, in many cases, licensed professionals, trained, paid, respected, or at least feared, which in the Middle Ages was basically the same thing. So let's walk through your life, a full day in the shoes, the gloves, and the very leather apron of a medieval torturer. You live near the castle or city jail, close enough to be summoned quickly, far enough that your neighbors don't have to hear everything. Your house is modest. You're not poor, but you're not wealthy either. You earn a steady wage from the city or the lord who employs you, plus occasional bonuses for particularly complicated cases. Think of it like a medieval gig economy, except the gig is extracting confessions, and Uber hasn't been invented yet. Your family situation is complicated. Torturers were often social pariahs. People respected what you did, or at least needed what you did, but they didn't really want to have dinner with you. Marriages into torturer families were common because, simply, no one else would marry you. Your daughter would marry the son of the local executioner. The executioner's cousin might marry your nephew. You formed a small, insular professional community, passing the trade down through generations the way a baker passes down recipes. Except the recipes involved more iron and screaming. Your children grew up understanding that their father's job was different. They didn't bring friends home for a visit. They learned early not to ask what dad's tools were for. And yet, in a twisted way, the family was close. Because when the whole world looks at you sideways, you hold tight to the people who don't. Breakfast is simple. Bread, maybe some hard cheese, a bit of ale, because water in medieval cities was basically poison wrapped in liquid form. You eat quickly because you have a busy morning. The judge has sent word. There's an accused thief and a suspected heretic both waiting for interrogation today. Quite the lineup. You head to the castle or municipal jail, called, depending on the city, the dungeon, the oubliette, the keep, or simply, that place we don't talk about loudly in public. The guards nod at you, not warmly. They nod at you the way you nod at the dentist, with a mixture of professional acknowledgement and personal unease. Now here's where it gets interesting, because a lot of what people think they know about medieval torture is completely wrong. First, torture was not just done willy-nilly. In most Western European medieval legal systems, torture required authorization. A judge had to sign off on it. There were rules about who could be tortured. Children and the elderly were often exempt, at least in theory. Nobles were usually exempt too, because of course they were. The law in many jurisdictions specified that torture could only be used when there was already substantial evidence against someone. It was meant to extract a confession, not to do the investigation for you. And crucially, a confession obtained under torture had to be repeated freely, without torture, the next day, to be considered valid. If the person recanted in the morning, the whole process started again. This doesn't make it okay. Let's be very clear. It was horrifying, morally abhorrent, and caused immeasurable suffering. But it was not the anarchic chaos of horror movies. It was systematic, documented, bureaucratic, which is, in its own way, even more disturbing. You arrive at the interrogation room because calling it a torture chamber is a bit dramatic for a Tuesday morning, and you review the case with the judge. The thief is first. He was caught near a merchant's warehouse. Two witnesses saw him in the alley. He denies everything. The judge wants a confession. You look at the man. He's thin, frightened, probably about 25. You feel something. Maybe not sympathy exactly, but something human. A recognition. This is not an abstract procedure. This is a person sitting across from you, and your job is to make him tell the truth, or what the judge decides is the truth, which is not always the same thing, and that particular distinction will haunt you on your quieter evenings. But you are a professional. You do your job. The first stage of interrogation was often not even physical. It was psychological. You showed the instruments. You explained what each one did in a calm, matter-of-fact voice, like a chef explaining his knives. The strapado, a rope attached to the wrist behind the back, used to hoist someone into the air. The rack, which stretched the body horizontally. Thumb screws, the boot, which compressed the leg. You laid them out, you described them, and you waited. Because here's the thing, and this is historically documented, a very large percentage of people confessed during this stage. Before a single device was used, the showing of instruments was often enough. Fear is a remarkable motivator. You knew this. You used it deliberately. Was it manipulation? Absolutely. Was it effective? Unfortunately, yes. If showing didn't work, you moved to lighter applications, the strapado usually, which could be used with varying degrees of severity. And you noted everything. There was a scribe in the corner, writing it all down. The exact time, the exact questions, the exact responses. You were not operating in darkness. You were operating in a bureaucratic spotlight, which is somehow both more reassuring and more horrifying than darkness. By midday, you finished with the thief. He confessed. To what exactly, you're not entirely sure was accurate, but the judge is satisfied. You get a break. You eat your midday meal alone or with the guards, who keep a respectful but noticeable distance. The afternoon brings the heretic case, and this is more politically sensitive. Heresy investigations often involve the church, specifically the Inquisition, if you're in the right century and the right country. The Inquisition had its own torturer examiners, but in many cases they contracted out to local professionals, which is you. Heresy cases were different. The questions were different. Instead of, did you steal the grain, you were asking things like, do you believe the soul exists independently of the body? And, have you attended secret meetings where bread was consecrated improperly? These were not questions with obvious physical answers. They required extended investigation. They required subtlety. Here is a truth about the medieval torturer that almost no one talks about. The job required intelligence. Not just physical strength. In fact, pure brute force was considered the mark of an amateur. A good torturer understood psychology. He read people. He knew when someone was genuinely broken and when they were performing collapse to make it stop. He knew how to calibrate, how to pause, how to resume. This was, in the ugliest possible sense of the word, a skilled profession. And now, right here, in the middle of your very strange Tuesday, I want to ask you something. Are you actually watching this whole video? Because if you are, you might be exactly the kind of person who loves diving deep into history's darkest and weirdest corners. And if that's you, hit that subscribe button right now, because we go to these places every single week. History is not just kings and battles. It's the people doing the jobs that everyone needed, but no one wanted to talk about. Subscribe. You won't regret it. Now back to your afternoon. The heresy interrogation finishes without full resolution. These cases often took multiple sessions, sometimes weeks or months. You close your notes, clean your instruments. Yes, they were cleaned. Infection was a practical concern, not a moral one, but still. And prepare to leave. But before you go, there's one more duty. Today is also an execution day, and in many medieval cities, the torturer and the executioner were either the same person or worked closely together. You might not swing the sword yourself, that might be a separate specialist, but you were often responsible for preparing the condemned, binding, positioning, ensuring the execution went smoothly and quickly. Efficiency was a mercy in its own grim way, and you took it seriously. The crowd gathered in the square. Executions were public. They were meant to be. They were social events. People brought children, vendors sold food. The whole spectacle served as a very direct reminder of what happened when you broke the law. You stood to the side doing your part, invisible in the way that essential workers are always invisible. The crowd watched the condemned. Nobody watched you. That night you go home. Your wife asks how your day was. There's a particular silence that falls when she asks this. You've been married long enough that she knows not to expect details. You eat supper, a decent meal because your wages are steady, maybe some roasted meat, root vegetables, dark bread. You sit by the fire. Your youngest child climbs into your lap without judgment, because children don't yet understand the thing their neighbors whisper about their father. This is the part of the medieval torturer's life that history almost never examines. The interior life. What did they believe about what they were doing? The answer probably is complicated. Many of them, genuinely, believed they were serving justice. The medieval worldview was not our worldview. Sin, confession, and the salvation of the soul were not metaphors. They were real, urgent, immediate concerns. If someone died unconfessed, they faced damnation. If someone's guilt was unresolved, society was spiritually unclean. Extracting confession was, in a deeply medieval framework of belief, an act of mercy. A harsh mercy, a brutal mercy, but mercy nonetheless. You were giving the accused a chance to confess, repent, and save their immortal soul. This doesn't make it right, but it makes it human, and that's the part that's hardest to sit with. There were also torturers who didn't believe any of that, who just needed the work, who had families to feed and no other trade, who did what was asked of them because the alternative was poverty, the uncomfortable ordinariness of evil, as a philosopher once called it. Not monsters, just people, doing what the system asked, collecting their wages, going home to supper. The equipment itself deserves a moment because popular culture has invented about 400 devices that either never existed or were extremely rare. The Iron Maiden, that famous spiked coffin, almost certainly a modern myth, or at least so rare in documented use as to be irrelevant. The actual tools of medieval torture were simpler and more effective. Ropes, weights, wooden frames, screws, water, fire sometimes, though burning was typically a punishment, not an interrogation tool. The psychology of discomfort, prolonged and controlled, was more effective than spectacle. The strappado was perhaps the most widely used. Simple, requiring minimal equipment, a beam, a rope, the prisoner's own body weight. It could dislocate shoulders without leaving permanent marks, which mattered in cases where the prisoner might be released, and the court didn't want visible evidence of what had happened. Deniability was a concept long before PR departments. Thumbscrews were real and genuinely used. The rack was real but less common than films suggest, partly because it was expensive to build and maintain. Sleep deprivation was a tool, keeping someone awake for days without ever touching them, standing for prolonged periods, confinement in small spaces. Many of the most effective techniques were not about physical pain at all, but about psychological disorientation. You knew all of this. You had been trained by your predecessor, probably a father or uncle, and you had refined the craft over years. You kept notes. Some torturers did, historically. Records of techniques, of cases, of what worked. These documents, when they survive, make for extraordinary and uncomfortable reading. Clinical, professional, devoid of the theatrical cruelty we imagine. On days when there were no interrogations, you maintained equipment, checked hinges, oiled mechanisms, replaced worn rope. You inspected the jail cells, reported on the condition of prisoners, because a prisoner who died before trial was a failure, legally and practically. Keeping people alive was part of your job. You brought food to cells sometimes. You weren't supposed to converse, but silence with a frightened prisoner in a cold stone room has a weight to it, and sometimes a few words passed. Were there moments of something almost like connection? Probably. The written record doesn't preserve this. But humans are humans in any century, and the proximity of vulnerability creates strange intimacies. There were also, it must be said, torturers who abused their position. who went beyond the legal mandate, who enjoyed the power. The historical record includes complaints, investigations, torturers who were disciplined or dismissed for exceeding their authority. The system, imperfect and awful as it was, had its own internal critique. People noticed, people objected. Not always loudly, not always effectively, but the objection existed. What did retirement look like? For most, it didn't. The trade was for life. You worked until you couldn't, and then your son, if you had one willing, took over. Some torturers in larger cities accumulated enough to buy small properties, to live modestly comfortable in their old age. But there was no pension, no ceremony, no gold watch. You just stopped being summoned, and the younger man with the leather apron started getting the calls instead. Death, when it came, presented its own complication. In some regions, torturers and executioners were buried in unconsecrated ground, outside the churchyard, with criminals and suicides. The church that employed their services for inquisitions also sometimes denied them the full rights it offered to others. The contradiction was noted at the time, rarely resolved. In other regions, torturers were buried normally, prayed over by the same priests who had authorized their work, mourned by their families, their headstones sitting quietly among the rest of the village dead. No indication of occupation, just a name and a date and the standard expressions of Christian hope. What they believed in those last moments, whether they felt the weight of what they had done, whether they framed it as service, as sin, as simple work, as something they wished had been different, we cannot know. History does not record the interior monologue of the man in the leather apron, but history does record that such men existed, that they were necessary to the systems their societies built, that they went home to suppers and fires and children in their laps, that they were, in the most unsettling way, ordinary. The medieval world was not a cartoon of darkness and cruelty. It was a world of people trying to make sense of existence with the tools and beliefs they had. And sometimes those tools were literal, made of iron, and the beliefs were about souls and sin, and a universe where justice had both earthly and eternal dimensions. We look back and see the horror clearly. They looked forward and saw something they called necessity. Understanding that gap, not excusing it, not minimizing it, but genuinely understanding how people arrive at the places they arrive at, is one of the most important things history can teach us. Because the gap between unimaginable monster and ordinary person doing what the system asked is, in every era, much smaller than we want to believe. Your day is over. You hang the leather apron on its hook. You wash your hands, a habit so ingrained it happens without thought. You sit by the fire. The flames are warm. The room is quiet. Tomorrow there will be new cases, new authorizations, new appointments. For now, just for this hour, you are only a person in a chair, watching fire, thinking thoughts that history will never record, and that might be the most haunting thing of all. If you've made it this far, genuinely thank you. Videos like this take real research, real time, and a lot of sitting with uncomfortable history to get right. If you learned something today, or if this made you see the past in a way you didn't expect, please leave a comment below. Tell me what surprised you. Tell me what disturbed you. Tell me what you want to know more about. Hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who love history the way you do. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we do this every week, and next time we go somewhere just as strange and just as human. And if you really want to support this channel, share this video with someone who thinks medieval history is just castles and knights. Show them what it was really like to live in that world. All of it, not just the pretty parts. See you next week. Stay curious.